Welcome to Order Militaris Radio TV, and today's important topic is the miracle on the Vistula River. Today we are welcome with Brother Alexis Panolo as the host of the show for today.
Thank you, AJ, for having me back on Order Militaris Radio TV. It's always a pleasure. And I am particularly delighted to do today's program on the Feast of St. Maximilian Kolbe, talk about the miracle Our Lady worked 100 years ago tomorrow, August 15th, 1920, to defend the newborn Catholic nation of Poland from the forces of darkness in this wonderful and most unusual kind of a miracle. Now, for you, those of you who didn't watch our program yesterday, which was the historical background, I'll just short summary. So after World War I, the Entente powers in the West, France, Italy, Great Britain, decided that in Eastern Europe, a whole bunch of small nations would come into being to be a buffer between Russia and the West. And one of those they decided that would be independent again would be Poland. Poland had existed until like the 1770s when it was carved up by the Kingdom of Prussia, the Kingdom of Austria, and the Kingdom of Russia. And so the Poles had lived for 150 years under foreign domination and had their national identity crushed and repressed. So they were absolutely delighted that they would become free, and all of a sudden, Polish men who had served in the armies of these three great kingdoms unenlisted and went to Poland, and Poles gathered from all around the world and joined the new Polish army, which fought for their independence and liberation. They were in occupied territory of the Kingdom of Prussia. They rebelled, and they overtook the German garrisons, and they started fighting on all fronts for their liberty. And they were led by a socialist by the name of Pilsudski, who actually had one time been an ally of Lenin and helped him get some explosives to attempt to assassinate the Tsar. But being inspired more by his love for his nation than for socialist ideologic trash, he decided he would fight for his country, and he took up arms against the Bolsheviks, and with effort to expand Poland's borders back to its original historic frontier in the West. And he was so successful, his troops took all of the Ukraine all the way up to Kiev. But upon entering Kiev, they created such a stir of Russian nationalism that the Bolsheviks started an intense battle and drove them all the way back to the walls of Warsaw. And this is where our show begins today. The Bolshevik army is ready to wipe the newly born Catholic nation of Poland off the face of the map. And all terror is breaking out in the Polish heartland. Mm-hmm. So AJ, what did the Polish army think of this quick and decisive counterattack of the Bolshevik army from Kiev? It was like totally unexpected, no?
Mm-hmm. Well, before I answer that, if you all want a copy of this amazing book that we're using to help tell the story, and again, as I said yesterday, before Stalin took power, the Red Army was actually pretty open with their documents. So he was allowed to get those documents with the Polish ones to write about this. It is Warsaw, 1920, Lenin's Failed Conquest of Europe by Adam Zamoyski.
Yeah, hold it a little closer. Yeah, okay. And you can get it on Amazon Books?
Yeah, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and wherever I think books are found. And so to answer your question, they weren't too pleased. It's right at the start of the chapter, titled the miracle of the Vistula. If the Russian capture of Wilno had shaken the confidence of the Poles, the fall of Brzezinski 3 weeks later came as a real shock. People could not understand how it was that, having broken through a front some 600 kilometers away, Tukhohevsky was only 4 weeks later approaching Warsaw and without having actually won a battle. This is not war. There are no corpses, reflected an astonished de Gaulle. Divisions advance and retreat without anyone knowing why. A sergeant of the 42nd Infantry did know why. The fighting had an insidious quality, since there were no trenches in which to take up positions, he wrote. One had to expect an attack from any quarter, and in consequence, the fighting was bloodthirsty, as you either won or you perished. Our men were just as cruel as the Bolsheviks. Human life lost all value. We knew that death was waiting for us at every turn, as the Bolsheviks either killed outright or drew out the torture as long as they could. But he even admitted that there was something incomprehensible about the relentlessness Russian advance. If anyone could have seen this wave of Bolsheviks advancing on us, they would have astonished on account of their appearance. He goes on, as some were barefoot, others wore bast leggings, others some kind of rubber confection. They wore a variety of headgear, even ladies' hats, winter caps, and kerchiefs, or nothing at all, with their hair in the wind. They were like weird apparitions. The inexplicable nature of this extraordinary threat gave it an uncanny quality. Something like the kingdom of the Antichrist is moving upon the whole Christian world, wrote the Russian philosopher Dmitry Merezhkovsky. A kind of resigned fatalism began to make itself felt throughout the country. The incessant worm-like movement by large numbers of enemy troops, punctured now and again by a sudden leap forward, a movement continuing for weeks on end, gave the impression of an irresistible rolling on like some heavy monstrous cloud, wrote Pazusti. There was something about it that destroyed hope, broke down the inner qualities of men, and the resistance of armies. For the military, this advance was a horrific kaleidoscope, producing a fresh picture every day in which new geographical names, numbers of regiments, and divisions jostled with new time factors and calculations of distances. All this kaleidoscope revolved slowly. The relentless monotony of its movement gave rise to a chaotic jumble of unfinished countermeasures, unfulfilled orders, and outdated reports, all totally irrelevant to the new situation as it crystallized. And if Tukhohevsky's beautiful march, as Podolsky's called it, reduced the Polish staff to memorize impotence, its effect on the rank and file was devastating.
Yeah, so it was quite unexpected, unorganized, quite unique. The Bolshevik army was a hodgepodge of a little of everything, but there was like a dark force behind it. And I think most commentators on the the Russian Revolution point that out. There was something more to the Russian Revolution than merely a political event. There was really a lot of dark forces behind it. So what did some of the Polish generals think of the retreating Polish soldiers? I mean, didn't they get upset about them, that they were retreating so easily?
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh. My dear Poles, I'm sorry. I'm going to have to butcher some names. Oh, you, wow. Zed Jedru Whiskey, neighbor, General Zolowski, one of the toughest and most popular generals in the Polish army, managed to keep a tight grip on his two divisions. His 10th, dubbed Zolowski's Iron Division by the Whites when it had served with Denikin in 1919, had borne the brunt of the fighting when Turovsky launched his offensive on 4th July. Yet its retreat, which at 700 kilometers would be the longest of any Polish unit, was orderly and defiant throughout. But even its soldiers were affected by the general psychoses. 6 weeks of constant backward movement created a sort of compulsion to retreat, wrote Zolowski. The soldiers thought about it when he went to sleep, and it was his first thought on waking. It assumed the character of a disease, and its germs entered every bloodstream. During those long weeks, we withdrew after every engagement, regardless of whether we had won or lost. It was not cowardice, or despondency, or lack of determination, more of a habit that had warped every mind. This habit was the most dangerous of all. Where, where and when and under what condition would it be possible to overcome it? Conditions were grueling. The road of retreat is infernal, noted a soldier of the 37th Litzinka Infantry. The heat, the lack of water, the stench of rotting corpse. The forest fires are turning it into a sort of hellish torture. Continuous shooting from the flank and the rear. The men had worn out their boots and uniforms. Food was irregular and insufficient. As it was summer, the villages they passed through could provide only milk, rotten potatoes, and unripe fruit, causing colic and diarrhea. Civilian refugees clogged the already crowded roads, increasing the disorder and spreading panic. The shortage of cavalry on the Polish side added to the sense of isolation and insecurity of the infantrymen as they trudged back, and every unit or group of men developed the same survival reflexes as a deserter. The pace of the retreat was that, according to Sikorowski, a dozen soldiers of his group actually became demented from exhaustion. The worst effects of the retreat, however, were to be felt hundreds of kilometers beyond the front, or in Podolsky's words, on the most dangerous front of all, the eternal front. Horrified by the rapidity of the retreat and increasingly doubtful as to whether it could be stopped, Polish society was on the brink of panic. European opinion had more or less given up on Poland. The London News Statesman reported that the Polish army seems for the time being almost to have ceased to exist as a coherent force. Foreign embassies evacuated their personnel as the military attaches called on General Haller to take their leave. They shook his hand like that of a bankrupt cousin, as he put it.
Yeah, so it was an absolute tumult. The whole eastern front of Poland was collapsing. And just for a little explanation of those of you who don't know anything about military tactics, when the whole army is retreating, even your one unit that could hold the ground has to retreat or be surrounded by the enemy and cut off and cut down. So that's why that general had to continue to retreat. But it's a long distance, it's 700 miles from Kiev to Poland, and to retreat the entire way over prairies that are like Nebraska, not even as rolling as hills in Nebraska, more flat and level maybe as you would say in Kansas, gets to be monotonous, and that monotony without proper supplies and any sign of hope can really break down an army and cause it to dissolve away. So in all of this, what is the Polish Revolutionary Committee doing? I mean, there were Marxists organizing already in Poland to turn it into a Soviet state, like they have attempted in Berlin and in Austria and Bavaria and Hungary and Romania and Bohemia. What were they up to in Poland?
Same type of thing. Accordingly, on the 23rd of July, Lenin created a Polish Revolutionary Committee Polivcom, in effect a Soviet government for Poland, consisting of the veteran Polish communist Julian Markulewski, the dreaded founder of the Russian secret police, Czechia, Felix Dresnitsky, the Jewish communist, Felix Kohn, Edward Prochnik, and Joseph Unizlisk to take power once Warsaw had fallen. The same afternoon, Kamenets issued fresh orders from the Red Army field headquarters at Somlinsk, urging Tuskevsky to press home his advantage with all speed and take Warsaw without delay. A week later, on 30th July, the Pole Revcom took up residence in the magnificent palace outside the Polish town at Bielaskov, Biel, Biel, Bielystok. Sorry, weird town.
Yeah, so they were up to all their evil things. And do you have more to add about that, AJ?
Yeah, even by Trotsky. Trotsky urged caution, but few listened. Delegates to the Communist International sitting in Moscow were in paroxysms of excitement as they watched the flag showing the positions of the Red Army move forward every day on the huge map that hung on the wall. World revolution seemed within reach. On 23rd July, Lenin wrote to Stalin, raising the possibility of a thrust through Romania, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, with the aim of staging a revolution in Italy. In his reply, Stalin agreed that it would be a sin not to try. Their enthusiasm blinded them to the realities of the situation at the front, which was far from being as rosy as appeared from the flagged-up maps. Tukhachevsky had moved the whole Western Front forward by 500 kilometers in a space of 5 weeks, defeating 2 Polish army groups in the process, and shattering the entire Polish system of defense. This sustained advance was not only a remarkable feat of arms, but also an extraordinary triumph of organization and logistics. Tukhachevsky had provided his 4 army groups with 30,000 peasant carts, and these were supplemented by requisition from every town and village his troops passed through. He took care to rebuild bridges and to adapt the railway tracks as he moved forward, managing to convert them to the Russian gauge to within 80 kilometers of Warsaw. This was a remarkable achievement given the poor technical resources of the Red Army and the speed of his advance. But this had all been achieved at immense cost in organization and effort, and every part of Tukhachevsky's army was beginning to feel the strain. His experience of the Russian Civil War suggested that the land through which his armies moved could provide them with supplies and make good his losses in men. But the nature of this campaign was radically different. Although it was not difficult to find enough communist sympathizers and disaffected young men to form local militias to cover the rear of the Red Army, few viable recruits came forward from the villages of Belarusia, and even fewer in Poland, and there was no real possibility of incorporating Polish prisoners or deserters into it. At the same time, the long march through increasingly hostile territory had not only thinned his forces, but also cooled much of their patriotic ardor. Tukhachevsky tells us his men were strong in spirit and did not fear the enemy, but he was in Solominsk. Komdiv Vietutna, the young Latvian-born former Tsarist NCO, now commander of the 27th Omsk Rifle Division, tells a different story. There were signs of great weariness in our troops, he writes. The condition of the armies, and particularly of their rear, was a source of very serious alarm. The parish priest of a small Polish town was less than impressed as he watched the Red Army march in. First came a galloping Cossack shooting wildly, accompanied by a civilian commissar. Then came the infantry, which inspired pity. Since most of the men were barefoot, he writes some wore civilian clothes, others uniforms of various armies, mostly Polish ones, presumably from the stores left behind by us in Belarusia, or taken from prisoners. One's heart ached at the sight of this famished and tattered mob.
Yeah, so this sets up the whole thing. The conflict now, the Soviets, or I'd say the Bolshevik army, is on the gates of Warsaw. And now it's their chance to wipe Catholic Poland off the map and march on to Central Europe. It's amazing how many the characteristics of this campaign that you're relating, AJ, are so similar to what we're going to see after the Second World War, when the communists just flood over Europe and are allowed by Churchill and Roosevelt to grab all of Eastern Europe, which they've always wanted to do. So the Masons gave it to them, and without even an eyelash blink. So, but what did the Bolsheviks try to do in a way of a blitzkrieg on the Polish army to wipe them out and thus open up all Poland for conquest? What did they try to do, and was it a mistake?
As you're hearing, they're constantly on the move. But one thing you don't hear is them resting. By the time they reach Warsaw or the Vistula, they are exhausted. And that is their fatal mistake. The Polish, by their constant retreating, weared them out. That's it.
So in 6 days did Poland raise an even larger fighting force than before the Battle of Warsaw, and how did this set the stage for what we're about to see?
Let's see. Yep, okay. At the beginning of August, he still held the initiative, and the Poles could not wrest it from him as long as he kept up the pace of advance. But this trump card speed was wrenched from him by the actions of Zolowiecki in the Narew Basin and Sikorsky on the Bug. They stopped the Russian advance in its tracks for 6 days, thereby giving the Poles a chance to regroup and strike back. Turkowski was not seriously troubled. He did not believe the Poles capable of seizing that chance. Like Lenin, he made light of what the Bolsheviks called stupid patriotism and thought Poland was defeated. Poland was more resilient polity and more cohesive society than Tuskegee, Lenin, or even most of her own allies suspected. The new threat to her continued existence so soon after the recovery of statehood galvanized large sections of society. The Catholic Church intensified pressure on the faithful to stand firm against the wiles of communism, to support the army and the government. The government and other agencies produced a barrage of propaganda supported by posters and went after how the Bolsheviks were mostly Jewish, creating the impression of vast alien conspiracy threatening every aspect of Polish life. In Pilsudski, the country had a leader capable of channeling the patriotic surge, while his political position had suffered as a result of his ill-judged offensive in Ukraine. He was still the commander-in-chief and exerted enormous authority. Pilsudski had been working hard throughout the past 3 months to create reserves and amass supplies, even though the supply route through Danzig had been blocked by German dockers and others severely disrupted by strike action. He did manage to create large stockpiles at Warsaw. In mid-July, he had issued a call for volunteers, which was to yield 164,000 615 men and women in a space of 6 weeks. General Haller, who was entrusted with the task of organizing them, formed some 30,000 of the men into independent volunteer division and the rest into either platoons and companies to be attached to existing units, refilled to be fed into depleted units, while the women made up defense battalion based in Warsaw and other threatened towns. These volunteers represented the wide social spectrum, including members of the Polish Parliament, the Sejm, teachers and civil servants, students, scouts, workers, and peasants, the majority under 20 years of age. The arrival in the ranks in the second week of August would be like an injection of fresh blood, raising morale as well as adding strength. But everything ultimately depended on how this strength was going to be applied.
Wow, that's quite amazing. 6 weeks, 166,000. That shows you how important authentic Catholic nationalism is. True Catholic patriotism. In Poland, you can say that patriotism also is also nationalism, because the nation of Poland is nation using as a state term, reflects the nation as a people. It's one ethnicity, the Polish people. So, and this is the great strength of Poland, which they have always used in history in their great deeds that they've wrought for the cause of Christ and now for their own defense. And we're going to see how Our Lady blesses Catholic patriotism. So, how did the Polish get their spine back and fight to save Warsaw?
It was thanks to the people. Yeah, let's see. And while most of the foreign diplomats had left the city and had filled with refugees from eastern Poland, and these contributed to the mood of suppressed panic. As was the eve of the Feast of the Assumption, churches were crammed with people praying to the Virgin for deliverance. Lord D. Aberon of the Inter-Allied Mission recorded the religious processions were so numerous, he had difficulty driving across the city. Members of Paluski's former underground military organization were stockpiling grenades at strategic windows in preparation for the last stand in the city. Armed scouts and battalions of uniformed women patrolled the streets of manned key points. Others waited with resignation, listening to the dull thud of artillery coming the eastern defense. So,
Summarize a moment, AJ, because I have to answer the door.
okay. So pretty much, folks, the people of Warsaw and all the other Polish people who came in as refugees did what they do. They prayed to Our Lady, held processions to Our Lady, and while the men prepared for the last stand in the city of Warsaw by planting grenades at certain windows to drop onto the Red Army if it came to be, the people prayed, did processions, and did their devotions. And it was so crowded that that ambassador couldn't drive in the streets of Warsaw with so many Marian processions happening in the city, while they heard artillery in the distance of the forest of the surrounding areas of Warsaw.
You know, people ask, why don't we see miracles today? Why doesn't heaven answer our problems? And here we have an example. We have the answer. If you're willing to ask God for help, He will answer you. But if you presume you deserve it, you won't get it. So here we see a nation, a Catholic nation, that merits the intercession of heaven, because they get down on their knees, they get in procession, and they implore Our Lady with faith and confidence of little children, knowing that as Queen of Heaven, she has all the power to save them. And that's a nation that merits divine protection, quite unlike many, many other nations who presume they deserve it because they think they're so great. And this is what's going to save Poland from Marxist takeover. Whereas many countries right now have fallen to Marxist takeover without so much as a fight. And their leading Catholic intellectuals are telling people to just surrender with so many arguments. So when did the Battle of Warsaw finally end?
Hold on, we gotta talk about the miracle.
Okay. So because you haven't let me know when the miracle is going to take place, and I didn't want to ask because for the sake of dramatic effect. So it's at this point the miracle takes place, or there's going to be a battle first?
It happens during the battle.
Okay, so how did the two forces engage, and where is the fight taking place?
It's at the Vistula River, just outside of Warsaw, where the Poles are fighting the Reds, and the Polish army has their machine gun bunkers up and their tanks going, everything going, but they're just holding firm. But then all of a sudden, the Polish don't see it, but the Red Army do, and they hear the talk because since I guess they served in most of the Poles served in the Russian army, they knew Russian, and they're like, "Our Lady appeared." What? Our Lady appeared? Our
Okay,
Lady
so
appeared.
what did the Russian army see? Do we have anything that really tells us about it?
Well, the one priest, Father Joseph Maria Bartnek, and I believe a woman, Eve Shorinsky, Stroniska, gathered preserved testimonies of Mary's apparition in the foreland of Warsaw, where Mary appeared in the sky. So they took the testimony of the survivors and was able to paint this painting, which is in the Polish Military History Museum in Warsaw.
And this apparition took place on the 14th or the 15th?
15th.
And was it in the morning or afternoon, evening, nighttime?
They don't say, but
Okay.
if it was just Our Lady, those who were still Christian at heart but were just fighting for Russia, I would say would drop on their knees and ask forgiveness. But all the descriptions say the Red Army fled. But why would they flee?
So in addition to seeing Our Lady, what else did they see?
The Winged Hussars in a charge.
Now, some people don't know anything about the Battle of Vienna in the 15th, 16th century. Who are the Winged Hussars? Why are they so famous? What did they do? And who did they fight?
The Winged Hussars were the famous Polish cavalry division of when the Polish were in a monarchy, and they were fierce. They moved as one. I mean, them to move, you would not recognize them moving individually. They would move one as one either way. Then their uniforms were of the metal, and but on the backs were wings. When they rode their horses at full gallop, it looked like angels on horseback charging at you. And this is
And
what, and these guys fought the Cossacks. These guys fought the Tartars. Um, Same folks they that Russia sent as cavalry units in the Battle of Warsaw here. And
now this cavalry also fought at Vienna, didn't, under Sobieski III?
yeah, and
And they were instrumental in defeating the Ottomans before the gates of Austria. So the ones who died in that battle surely were died a holy death and went to heaven because they were fighting for the defense of Christ, and they were killed out of hatred for Christ. So to see these hussars in heaven, coming out of heaven with Our Lady, is really confirms theologically that Catholic soldiers who fight to defend Christianity against the enemies of Christ die martyrs of death and are glorified in heaven, are very dear to Our Lady. But to see these cavalry charging them from the skies must have been absolutely terrifying. So what does the Russian army do?
that is when that is when they break their lines and start retreating. And that is when the Polish start to fight like Polish. They start to act like Polish soldiers and fight ferocious. I mean, just vicious and like the Poles of old.
So at the same time, the Polish army was inspired, even though they didn't see the miracle.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you say they saw Our Lady in the skies, did they see Our Lady of Grace, or they see Our Lady of Czestochowa? What kind of image did they see? Do we know?
Well, let's see. Uh, Kind of looks like Our Lady of Fatima in the painting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That painting you're going to put on the title page of the program page for this video, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And a link to it in the link. So they saw Our Lady of Fatima. Now that's really amazing. So they didn't see Our Lady of Czestochowa. They saw something like Our Lady the Immaculate. And so this is a really unusual miracle. I can't recall in modern times a saint appearing to support an army in battle. I know that Santiago is said to have appeared in several important battles in Spain against the Moors. And I know St. Michael's is said to have appeared in the Korean War to help American soldiers, or at least to help a few of them escape from the communists. But this is a really unusual miracle. And why didn't we hear about this earlier? I mean, was this kept secret for decades?
Yeah, it was kept secret. No Polish politician, no politician of the West wanted this to be leaked out. I think they feared that if this leaked out, that the return of the Winged Hussars, those who died in Vienna with Our Lady, they would probably be like, maybe that's a sign that we should restore the monarchy.
So they were afraid that knowledge of this miracle would lead to a Catholic uprising worldwide against the Masonic order and against Marxism. That's probably true. And this is why this program we're making is so important. A lot of people mistakenly think that the way to solve every problem is to get on your knees and say the rosary. Now, I'm the first one to say get on your knees and say the rosary, but sometimes you not only have to get on your knees and say the rosary, you have to get up from your knees with a sword in your hand and get on horseback and ride. So you can't presuming that prayer solves everything is actually heresy. It's called pietism. It's not the Catholic faith. It's not taught in the Old or the New Testament. Even Christ said the apostles should take a real sword. He didn't say, when you're persecuted, pray. He said, no, you should sell your cloak and buy a sword. So that's true Catholic spirituality, not the false one spread by modernists and Freemasons and Marxists. So this is why Catholics have the duty and the right to overthrow non-Catholic governments that persecute them. And they shouldn't just be getting on their knees and praying that God do something about it when they have all the means to do something about it. Okay, that's just hypocrisy.
Yeah.
So this is really amazing. Our Lady and the Hussars who are in heaven come down and to terrify the Bolshevik army and give grace to the Catholics fighting to drive them out. And the battle begins there on the Vistula, but how much do the Poles drive the Russians out?
Yeah. Before that, a priest who is also a chaplain is leading the men there. I mean, they didn't see it, but I think they felt that. And he led the men in a charge. He was only with his crucifix in hand, charging at them. And he died. Right? He died from a gunshot. Father Ignacy Skorpica. Skorpica. Sorry, Father.
God bless you, Father. Surely a martyr of the faith there,
Yeah.
To be inspired like that. So, and that's, most people don't think that chaplains carry guns into battle, but actually the Catholic tradition is the chaplain to carry a crucifix and go unarmed into battle. There's no stronger weapon than the cross.
Yeah. All right.
So the Poles rally, the Russians are retreating. What happens next?
Let's get all my numbers right here. Because right now it's going to start getting a little bit long with all this information. Got another page numbers here. Know where I put the crosses. Far from running out of speed, the 5 divisions of Paderewski's strike force was racing ahead. The music of war was no longer drilling out some half-hearted concert dance. He recalled it had switched to a lusty gallop. The 1st Legionary Infantry Regiment had covered 54 kilometers on August 16th and slept only for 3 hours before setting off on its second lap of 37 kilometers, followed by 5 hours of sleep. See here, they rush forward to beat the enemy back, and they rest. Then they do it again, and then sleep, and do it again. Then another one was 5 hours of sleep. Third lap of 45 kilometers, followed by 7 hours of fighting and 4 hours of sleep. Then a 4-day-long slog of 125 kilometers, punctured with a snatches of rest, followed by 14-hour battle of the headquarters of the Communist Party in Poland, Białystok.
Well, they were inspired and on fire to fight so much and sleep so little.
Yeah. Let's see here. In the course of the 13 days, the regiment would have covered 450 kilometers, taken 12,000 prisoners, and 60 guns at a total cost of under 250 dead and wounded. As de Gaulle noted admirably, the Polish soldier is a marcher of extraordinary endurance. Well, it kind of helps if you got your ancestors above.
That's one of the most successful military campaigns in human history. I can tell you that. Not even Patton had such small losses. And these people were just raised a few weeks before. They're absolutely green troops. But they had the power of Our Lady and the mantle of Our Lady and the spirit of the winged hussars of old.
Yeah.
And so they keep the attack on, and we conquer almost all of eastern Poland. Is that not right?
Oh, yeah. Let's see here. A couple of days after the start of the strike from the Wepres, the impetuous had set all other units of the Polish Central and Northern fronts in motion, and by 20th August, all forces in the area were moving north, the individual divisions racing each other to trap the disoriented Russian armies. By then, Tuskegee had issued his latest and only sensible order, that of a general retreat. Cork, whose army was still in relatively good shape, was able to conduct a fighting withdrawal. On the 21st of August, his 15th Division put up a spirited defense of Lamaza against Tadeuszki's 4th Army. Lazarevich also began his retreat in good order, but since he was continually veering northward in order to avoid the oncoming Polish spearheads, his units soon became mixed together. While this reduced their operational ability, they would be no easier for the Poles to stop than a herd of buffalo. And let's see, page 108. Okay. At the time, Tuskegee had plenty of other things to worry about. The remains of the 16th Army were fleeing eastward in small groups, often avoiding roads and towns, with only Putnam's 27th Division down to a quarter of its original strength. Still a functioning unit, Putnam was now both the rear guard and the left wing of the whole Western Front. Having made freak radio contact with Tuskegee on the 21st of August, he had been ordered to do what he could to cover the retreat of the remnants of Solohov's other division in Kivovis and Mozart group. On August 22nd, as Putnam approached Bialystok, he found a disorderly column of unarmed men from Solohov's and Kiveshin's defeated units, tailing back as far as 12 kilometers. The Polish 1st Legionary Division had taken the town that morning. Cutting off their retreat, Putnam launched an attack with opened the road for long enough to let some of the stragglers through. But when it was closed by a counterattack from the Poles, he changed course and moved on, leaving them to their fate. On 25th August, he crossed the river Niemen and made for Wolkowisk, out of reach of the right arm of the Polish strike force. So they wanted to get the heck out of Dodge and out of the way of the Polish army.
It's understandable when you have the whole Polish nation coming after you. That's not something that's going to help you sleep. How far after defeating the Red Army did the Polish finally push the communists back to? They pushed the communists back how far?
Oh, let's see here. Come on, buddy. Where you at? There we go. Petlura was once more making for Kiev with 30,000 men. Badawisk was taking possession of Belorussia at the head of some 18,000 of his own, and further 10,000 White Russians under General Peremykin and 2,000 Cossacks under Vladimir Yurov were on their way to link up with the White Army of General Wrangler, which was advancing from the Crimea. The Bolshevik leadership faced one of its worst crises to date. The only thing that could save it was a ceasefire. That came into effect on October 16th, and the Polish armies came to a halt. The Sixth Army, on its way from the Latvian border, did not even detrain the Solominsk. It trundled on southward to be used again against Wrangler's Whites. So as far as Solominsk, Kiev, and Belorussia, it pushed them all the way back.
The moral of this story is when the enemies of the church want to sign a peace treaty, that's when you don't sign a peace treaty and you keep fighting because victory was be had. And so that's really a wonderful victory. Poland was ready to be wiped off the map, and they ended up conquering not only all their lost territory, but a good chunk of the Ukraine. And 18 years later, after this truce was signed, how were things going to change when the Soviet Union came back in World War II? Did they remember their defeat, and was that part of their motivation to sign a treaty with Hitler for the division of Poland?
Yeah. Let's see. Peace was finally signed between Poland and Russia at Riga on 18 March 1921. The Polish negotiators, eager to repair Poland's damaged image abroad, did not insist on her historic frontiers and settled for a compromise that nevertheless included much of Belarus and Ukraine within her borders. Nor did they attempt to accommodate independent Ukraine in the settlement, but Vestula was soon overwhelmed by the Red Army, and the remnants of his forces were disarmed as they sought refuge in Poland once more. They, along with the defeated White Russians and other oppressed minorities, regarded the peace, as did many outraged Poles and the Bolsheviks themselves, as no more than a truce in the ongoing struggle. And so it turned out to be. In 1939, the Soviet Union would seize the opportunity offered by Hitler to help itself to Polish territory up to the line roughly following the suggested by Lord Curzon in the summer of 1920. 2 years later, many Petrolus, White Russians, Georgians, and others would throw in their lot with Germany in the hope of ousting the Bolsheviks or gaining independence. In 1945, Stalin would achieve much of what he and Lenin had set out to do in 1920. But after 1989, it would be the turn of the heirs of Pilsudski and Petrula to triumph. Seen in the context, even events in 1920 seem not only irrelevant but almost quaint. The horrific Armageddon that rolled back and forth across the area 2 decades later. And let's see here. Okay. The dark night of the communism that engulfed it for half a century after that make them appear almost Lilliputian. The frontiers which were deemed so important then were swept into oblivion. So were the state structures to which so much value had been attached, and so were staggering proportions of the principal actors. The officer who led the 8th Lancer into the charge of Kurrawa lived out his last years in West London under the premiership of Margaret Thatcher. Budenoni had died in his bed a decade earlier at the grand old age of 94, a hero of the Soviet Union. They were among the lucky ones. 1926, Petrula, whom destitution had forced into the profession of cabaret artiste, was assassinated on the boulevard of Saint Michel in Paris by a young Jew whose parents had been killed during the pogrom in Kiev. The Polish chief of staff, Rodwadziewski, who, as a military governor of Warsaw, resisted Pilsudski's coup d'état of 1926, died 2 years later in suspicious circumstances. Pilsudski himself died in 1935, having achieved cult status. In 1945, Marshal Zhukov took time off from pursuing the retreating Germans to visit his grave in the Royal Mausoleum in Krakow's Cathedral. Zhukov and his comrade Timoshenko were also fortunate. Between 1935 and 1938, Tukovsky, Guy, Solov, Sergeyev, Lavrets, Kork, Putna, Yakir, Primakov, Uvarishk, and countless other senior officers were murdered in Stalin's purges. Even the wives of Tukovsky and Uvarishk were declared enemies of the people and shot in 1941. A year earlier, in 1940, Trotsky had been tracked down in Mexico by an assassin sent by Stalin and murdered with an ice pick. When Russia went to war in 1939, their army was led by old cronies such as Budony and Voroshilov, with predictable results. Zbigniew Ritz, who had commanded the Polish army in 1939, died in Warsaw in 1941. Others, including Stanislaw Haller, General Skierski, commanded the Fourth Army in Pilsudski's strike force, and Pilsudski, the dashing young colonel of the 14 Lancers, were among the 20,000 Polish officers who ended up in the mass graves of Katyn and other places of extermination. Tens of thousands perished in Nazi concentration camps, while Sikorsky lost his life when his plane crashed into the sea shortly after taking off from Gibraltar in 1943. It is as though a curse has been cast on them. It is difficult to shake off entirely the suspicion that Stalin's behavior toward the Poles in the 1940s was tinged with the revenge of the humiliation of 1920. He had indeed been one, and the Bolshevik leadership was profoundly affected by it. The events had revealed the frailty and limits of their power. They also suggested that the whole world was raged against them, that the masses in other countries could not be relied on to support them. This gave rise to siege mentality, isolationism, and the doctrine of communism in one country, expressed to the outside world in a sulky defensive and aggressiveness. Hurt pride is in evidence in the attitude of most of the Russian leaders to the rest of the world, beginning with Lenin. The isolation in which Russia spent the 1920s and 30s undoubtedly assisted Stalin in his seizure of power and his reign of terror, and ultimately pushed her into the arms of other regime born of humiliation and fire determination to overthrow the Versailles settlement. Nazi Germany and when his troops marched into Poland in support of the Germans in 1939, Stalin showed that he had learned the lessons of 1919 and 1920.
So that final reading shows us that the miracle of the Vistula was part of a spiritual battle between Our Lady and Marxism. And it wasn't just to save the Polish nation, it was to demoralize international communism, and especially communism in Russia. After that, Russia becomes defensive and spiteful, and that weakens the entire spread of communism worldwide in a spiritual way. Communism would spread to many other nations, but eventually failed as a system, and today only exists in China, North Korea, Cuba, Venezuela, maybe. And maybe there's a few other small nations where there's strong Marxist parties like Nicaragua. Are in parties that have been infiltrated in the West by Marxist doctrine, so like the Democratic Party in the United States and most of the socialist parties of Europe. But they have a spiteful attitude. They're not pro-people. They're anti-people. They're about oppressing and attacking their own people, and so consequently they build up their own resistance by the natural weight of their attitude. And this is all part of Our Lady's plan, and so we see that the consecration of Russia to the Immaculate Heart will be a decisive victory against world Marxism. It has not yet taken place, and maybe the indication of the miracle of Our Lady's appearance on the Vistula on August 15th, 1920, gives us some sign that soon we will see the triumph of the Immaculate Heart in our own age. This has been 100 years now, and the fact that she took such quick action after 1917 to fight Marxism encourages us to pray the Rosary every day so that we might obtain the hierarchy's consent to the consecration of Russia to the Immaculate Heart.
Yeah. And when what was it, FDR, Churchill, and Stalin got together at that one meeting that decided the fate of Europe after when they defeated the Nazis in World War II. It was there that Stalin remembered, I want Poland. I want to punish them.
Yeah, Poland to a certain extent is punished even today. I don't know if many people know that the modern boundaries of Poland are not its natural boundaries. After the Second World War, she was deprived of most of her territory, and not by her own decision. It was by the Allies throwing her into the hands of Russia. And even after the communism fell in Russia, she was never given her territory back that is rightfully hers, which is a good section of Belarusia and the Ukraine. And this remains a long-standing injustice to the Polish people, and it has never been rectified, and no one has even taken up their cause on it. This is one of the great injustices of history. I think Poland is the only nation in Eastern Europe who has been deprived of her territory. Yes, the Baltic nations have lost a little of their territory, but Poland was deprived of almost half of her territory, and it's never been given back. And that's because of Eastern Europe, the only nation that's Catholic other than Lithuania is Poland. So the world powers knew who to punish, and they're still punishing Poland. And Poland has the right to a lot more. And if there's Poles listening to this program, I say be proud, stand strong, and don't back down an inch. Assert your rights, and insist that you get your territory back, because that belongs to your nation and your people.
Yeah. And I want to briefly touch on it, but we'll touch more on it Monday in the terrorism show. You have Marxists in your country. You have the George Soros organization going around to our monuments, putting on them rainbow flags or painting rainbows on them. And you have priests. You support this. Back in the good old days of the PS dynasty, the PS would make sure those priests will be removed from the priesthood and punished even severely. I I I replied to when I learned about that one priest who took part in it. He only got 5 years. I was like, he's lucky. If I was in charge, he got life in prison, removed from the priesthood. God bless the PS dynasty.
Long live the PS dynasty. So thank you, AJ, for doing these two programs on the miracle on the Vistula. This is something that most Catholics in the West know nothing about. It's one of the great Marian miracles of the 20th century. And I encourage all Catholics to share this program and yesterday's program on the miracle of the Vistula, so people get to know that Our Lady wants us not only to get on our knees and pray, but at times also to get on our horses with a sword and fight.
Mm-hmm. And we need you to be very generous and very supportive and promote the Beirut Humanitarian Relief Fund. I think we've used up what Twitter has allowed us to be seen on Twitter. Is now censoring us pretty good. Only the evil Masonic trolls are coming out of the woodwork, and the lady who covers Marie Antoinette, even Blogspot's censoring her because I asked her to put our banner and stuff on her blog free. She gladly is trying to do it, but Blogspot won't let her. So she's still working on it.
There is now a concerted effort by the social media companies to prevent Catholics and Christians from sending any aid to Beirut. It's pretty clear they want to build Beirut as a gay, left-wing, Marxist, globalist stronghold in the Mideast. You see manifestos going around saying you should give to gay organizations, you should give to secular organizations, and they're watching social media. On Militaris Cath, we tweeted out this morning a tweet warning Christians everywhere of the game that's being played in the humanitarian aid for Beirut. And immediately a left-wing troll came out and viciously attacked Catholics with a very foul language. So we Catholics, if we just sit back and do nothing, or if we are content to give our monies to places like UNICEF or the Red Cross, or even Catholic Charities, which is now controlled by international Marxism, your money is not going to get to actual Christians. It's going to go into organizations to indoctrinate children in homosexuality, vaccinate them with the COVID-19 vaccine to destroy their health and genetics forever, exterminate the Christian people from Beirut, and establish a gay tourist haven in the Mideast. That's basically their objectives, to say in the most crude fashion. And so we need to see this as a crusade, and a crusade of charity. And our order is proud to participate in this. And as president, I guarantee if you donate to our Beirut Humanitarian Relief Fund, it's going to go to Catholics, and it's going to be support the true Christian faith and the victims of the city, and not advance these agendas. Okay, so if we can raise at least 25,000, I will go personally to Beirut and assess the situation, and I will list for you all the humanitarian organizations that are pro-abort, pro-pedophilia, pro-homosexuality, pro-Freemasonic Lodge, pro-Islamic jihadis, and all the other errors they're pushing there. So you know that don't you dare give your money to them, or they're going to use it against your own brothers and sisters in Christ, and who are the really authentic, faithful organizations that are helping out. And if need be, our corporation at its own expense will found its own charitable organization in Beirut to make sure that the funds go truly to Catholics and to promote Christendom, not to promote the New World Order, which is pretty clear what they're aiming to do there now in Beirut. And that kind of implies that one of their agents is the one who launched the bomb, who ignited that explosion in Beirut. And if we don't act strongly, they're going to take this as a sign. They're going to start launching bombs like this in Christian cities around the world, because they've made it clear for now 50 years they want to wipe Christianity off the face of the map. They have to take control of the main Christian cities of the world. And what better than ammonium nitrate bombs, if it was an ammonium nitrate bomb? There's some doubt about that now. So we need to see this as a crusade. And I want to thank the 4 individuals that followed my lead and donated $1,000 to the Beirut Humanitarian Fund. I don't have an income. I don't have health care. I don't have a pension fund. I live by alms. I donated $1,000. I think almost everyone out there who has an income and pensions and savings could at least do that. I think lawyers should be donating at least $10,000. You guys can afford it. You're well off. You live in nice houses. You don't have anything to worry about. These people have nothing. We have more than 150,000 Catholics who are without a home. More than 40,000 children are homeless. More than 3,000 Catholics were probably injured. And probably half those dead were Catholic. And these people have lost also their employment. And they're in a country that's not going to help them anyway. And now they're being attacked by all these Masonic, globalist, pervert, Islamic organizations around the world that want to take that city for themselves and indoctrinate, and in exchange for giving these people humanitarian aid, force them to accept the New World Order. So we're going to stand by and let this tragedy happen, which would be a worse tragedy than an explosion. We cannot stand by. This is a crusade. It is a crusade for our brothers and sisters in Christ. And we have to get it out of our head what is, I think, the cause of a lot of silence out there in the West is there's only one group in the West that's really connected to Beirut, okay, other than the Lebanese, of course, who are emigres. And that's Catholics, because the Catholic Church is all throughout the West. The Catholic Church is found in North and South America and all of Western Europe and good parts of the former colonies of the European powers. And there's the Catholic Church is about half the Christians of Beirut. Now, there's also the Orthodox there, and they're spread around too. But in the West, we Catholics are the ones who are connected. We may not be connected ethnically, but Beirut, don't think that because they're not Europeans that we don't have any duty in Christ to help these people. Don't be a bigot, okay? There's a lot of bigotry out there. I know a lot of groups. We got trolled by someone from South Africa who thinks that everyone in Lebanon's a Muslim and therefore this shouldn't happen. He was pretending to be a member of our order. He was not a member of our order. He doesn't even follow our account. Some white racist from South Africa, and it's totally intolerable, you know. And the racists from South Africa haven't been Christian. They're Dutch Reformed Protestants, okay, who are bitterly anti-Catholic for centuries. So I don't know what the guy's trolling us, but all the enemies out. I mentioned how the Freemasons are trying to take in. Oh, they all came at us, okay? So they know what their agenda is, and they know who the enemy is. The enemy is the Catholic Church, and the bombing of Beirut was to destroy Christians in Beirut and to turn that into a globalist city. So this is a crusade, and I ask you to give sacrificially, okay? If you have a pension fund with several $100,000 in it, you should give, I would ask you to give $10,000, okay? to save these people, because you have all the security in life you need and more so. These people have nothing anymore. They're sleeping in the streets. I don't know if you've seen the images. The mainstream media won't even show it. People completely covered with blood and glass all over their bodies. Mainstream media won't show it because they don't want you to be compassionate. And I know this is a bit of a long saying, but please support the Beirut Humanitarian Fund, and please share the news of what's happened in Beirut and rally all Christendom to their defense. Please, for the love of God, for the love of Christ, and for the love of Our Lady of Lebanon.
Tomorrow's show will be a little bit different. It won't be at our normal time, or it's in the morning, but be morning in California, afternoon here, evening there, and we'll be having Dr. Who we having on tomorrow?
Dr. Thomas Kozinski, excuse me, it's a Polish name, one of my colleagues from the Scholasticum, and he is an expert on the topic of whether the medical mask should be worn, why not, what's really behind it, and he runs a Facebook group on this, and he's going to give us some really interesting. He's a former professor of philosophy from Wyoming Catholic College. So I think everyone will want to tune in. This is one of the first speakers we're going to have on Ordo Militaris Radio from outside, and he's going to give us some really high quality information. I encourage you to be on. We're going to do a roundtable. AJ will host it, and he and I will discuss the matter and the politics of the medical mask and the COVID-19 and the New World Order.
Be 1 p.m. here, 8 p.m. there, 11 a.m. in California. So tune in tomorrow. What do you think? Should we air it live or not?
You decide tomorrow, AJ.
Okay.
If you want to do it live or do it as a call-in. Probably we won't be able to do the call-in because a three-way meeting is going to take up a lot of throughput.
Yeah. Well, I'll surprise you. If you see the live button go on, you'll know. So tune in tomorrow for our first guest and about the mask, and see if YouTube will take it. So tune in. Please help the Beirut Humanitarian Relief Fund. Please promote it on and off social media, because it's getting censored out there. And this is Ordo Militaris Radio TV signing off. Deus Volt.
Deus Volt.